Every year we see a couple of later round wide receivers absolutely explode for fantasy football and finish as top 12 players at the position. In 2023, it was Nico Collins' massive breakout year, plus big seasons from DJ Moore and Mike Evans in the middle rounds. Last year in 2024, we got Brian Thomas Jr., Ladd McConkey, Jackson Smith-Njigba, and Jerry Jeudy all having monster years, as well as Terry McLaurin's big year finally playing with an elite quarterback. So, who are the guys that we're looking at for those breakout seasons this year that we can snag later in our drafts? More specifically, who is going outside of the top 30 at the wide receiver position in the 6th round or later that will massively outproduce that ADP? Well, I have 6 players that I think can all finish as wide receiver ones this year, including the last guy who may just be the best candidate for a league-winning breakout season of anyone this year, so don't miss out on that one. We'll start with the highest player in ADP, and that is new Panthers rookie wide receiver Tet McMillan, who was drafted in the 1st round, 8th overall in the 2025 NFL Draft, and fills a massive and immediate need on the Panthers offense at wide receiver. For those of you who don't really follow rookies as much or even know who Tet McMillan is, he is a 3-year early declare out of Arizona who had back-to-back seasons of 1,300 plus yards as a sophomore and junior and scored 8 or more touchdowns all 3 years in college. He is a beast of a player at 6'4", 220 pounds, runs a sub 4.5, is a great route runner, can make all of the contested catches that you want. He can go up and moss defenders, plus has sneaky yak ability that you don't really see often from players his size. In the dynasty streets, the popular comps for him as a prospect were Mike Evans, Drake London, T. Higgins, even a little bit of Nico Collins as well. Just these big-bodied X-receivers who can become the focal point of an offense on the outside, but also have a little bit of flexibility to move around the formation too. So for a player as pedigreed as Tet McMillan to then join an NFL offense as desperate for wide receiver help as the Carolina Panthers, in year 2 of the Dave Canales offense, in year 3 of Bryce Young's career, the sky is really the limit here. The talent gap between Tet McMillan and the rest of the Panthers receivers is massive. And if you want an upside target share number just based on 2024 numbers, Deontay Johnson, Jonathan Mingo, and David Moore combined for 140 targets last year. Now, I'm not projecting him to just come in and get 140 targets immediately, but the upside is there from players not there anymore from last year, plus the passing volume that we know Carolina is going to have based on being a bad team. And who is the one player that is by far the most talented, quarterback-friendly guy to throw to on this team? It's Tet McMillan. If you're looking for this year's Brian Thomas Jr., an absolute alpha wide receiver 1 in a bad offense with minimal competition around him, that to me is Tet McMillan this year. Now the next guy on the list is Calvin Ridley, a guy who's pretty much in the same situation as Tet McMillan, but with a proven track record of either very good to even elite NFL success on multiple teams throughout his career. On the surface, I think Ridley is just a solid pick from a floor standpoint. He's being drafted in the 7th round around wide receiver 35-ish, which he's beaten in each of the past 2 seasons as a 1,000-yard receiver. He finished as the wide receiver 18 in 2023 in Jacksonville and was the wide receiver 28 last year in Tennessee. Hasn't always been pretty, but being the wide receiver 1 on a bad team with very little target competition offers a solid weekly floor, plus then the upside of bigger weeks from explosive plays and touchdowns. But obviously, I do see a path to a much higher ceiling. That's why he's in a video about fantasy wide receiver 3s who could become fantasy wide receiver 1s. And that path for Calvin Ridley this year is centered around the addition of rookie quarterback Cam Ward, who is so much better than the combination of Will Levis and Mason Rudolph. Ward, also a gunslinger, willing to take chances on big throws just like Levis and Rudolph did, but Ward is at least accurate on those throws, and the propensity for turnovers is a lot lower. The way I see it, we basically have 2 possible ceiling outcomes for Calvin Ridley this year with a rookie quarterback, both being reflections of performances that we saw last year from receivers with rookie quarterbacks last year. The first of which is Courtland Sutton, which I don't know if people realize this, but Sutton was the wide receiver 15 last year in PPR formats with almost 1,100 yards and 8 touchdowns on 135 targets. That production isn't really all that different from Calvin Ridley's last year, especially if we presume that Ward is a better and more accurate passer than Levis and Rudolph and raises Ridley's catch percentage from a putrid 53% last year up closer to around 60% where Courtland Sutton was last year. If you give Ridley an extra 10 to 15 receptions on his end of season total last year, he's a top 18 fantasy wide receiver. The other ceiling outcome for Ridley is being this year's version of Terry McLaurin, who succeeded massively with a new and much better rookie quarterback. The funny thing about McLaurin's 2024 season, though, is it wasn't really much different from all his other seasons in the receptions and receiving yardage categories, but 13 touchdowns, nearly doubled his previous career high, and was almost as many as he had in the previous 3 seasons combined. That, plus a 70% catch percentage, led to insane efficiency all over the field, especially in the red zone. So, if Cam Ward is able to elevate this Titans offense to a whole different level, Ridley would be the primary benefactor of that and could be a league winner at 7th round prices in drafts with higher efficiency, big play capabilities, and more scoring opportunities. Now, I want to turn my attention to the West Coast and the San Francisco 49ers offense, specifically highlighting Jauan Jennings, who is easily found in the 8th or even 9th rounds of drafts, but I believe, as well as John Paulson believes, will greatly outproduce that price. I don't think people realize how good Jauan Jennings was over the entire last year. Through 15 games, he put up almost 1,000 yards and 6 touchdowns on 113 targets. That is a 17-game pace of 1,100 yards and 7 touchdowns on 130 targets, which is essentially the same stat line as Jackson Smith-Njigba, Ladd McConkey, and Garrett Wilson last year. And if you filter his game log down to just games he played over 60% of snaps, his 17-game pace jumps to 1,300 yards and 11 touchdowns on 150 targets, which is essentially Amon-Ra St. Brown's stat line from 2024. And the best part about Jennings' production last year is that the offense is basically the same this year as it was last year, so why wouldn't we expect Jennings to basically just do the same thing? Sure, Christian McCaffrey is going to be back and hopefully healthy this year, but I think that he soaks up a lot of the targets that Deebo Samuel left behind from last year. Brandon Ayuk is rehabbing from his ACL injury and is projected to start the year on the PUP. Then who knows how long after that it'll take for him to really get back into form. Ricky Pearsall is still a large unknown who only had 2 good games last year after battling injuries all summer and after getting shot. And guess what? Pearsall missed OTAs and minicamp this year with a hamstring injury already, so maybe Pearsall is just more of a injury-prone kind of player right now and can't work his way into a larger role just because of injuries. So all things being equal, it seems like San Francisco is going to have to rely heavily on George Kittle and Jauan Jennings again this year, just like they did last year, except this year, Jennings will probably start the year as a full-time player and not get thrown into it by necessity like he did last year, which means he can hit the ground running, have a full 17 games of 80 to 90+% of snaps, and a large target share as one of Brock Purdy's top options. Obviously, his contract situation is going to need to clear up, as the current news right now at the time of this recording is that Jennings is holding out for a new deal, so depending on when you're watching this, hopefully that's cleared up by training camp, but as long as Jennings is healthy and he's participating in training camp, possibly under a new and larger contract, I will be drafting as many shares of him as possible as the potential 49ers wide receiver 1 in 2025. And I know I just kind of dumped on Ricky Pearsall just a second ago, but I also think that he is a good flyer to take a shot on this late too, as his ADP is right around Jennings on most platforms. Assuming that he can get and stay healthy from the hamstring injury that he had in June, he should also start the season as a potential top option for Brock Purdy, as he was drafted to be one in the first round of last year's draft. And I know I said he only had 2 good games last year, which is technically true, but man, were those 2 games absolutely incredible. 8 receptions for 141 yards and a touchdown in week 17, 6 receptions for 69 yards and a touchdown in week 18. If he can put up games like that on a consistent basis this year, he'll have been an incredible value at his current ADP. I actually think it's entirely possible that both Jennings and Pearsall are top 25 fantasy wide receivers this year. George Kittle is also a top 3 fantasy tight end, and Christian McCaffrey is a top 3 fantasy running back. The Niners have a very soft schedule this year, and with their defense as gutted as it was after free agency, they're going to have to throw and score more to win games, and everybody involved in that offense is going to have a chance to be very productive for fantasy football, especially when you can take shots on Jennings and Pearsall this late in your fantasy drafts. Now, in a very similar vein to Jauan Jennings is Raiders wide receiver Jakobi Meyers, one of the most underrated receivers in the NFL and for fantasy football over the last couple of years. Let's start with the fact that Meyers already the wide receiver 19 in PPR formats last year with over 1,000 yards and 4 touchdowns on 130 targets. And he did that while missing 2 games. Let's also point out that after Davante Adams was injured and then traded, Meyers' 17-game pace from week 4 on was 100 receptions, over 1,200 yards, and 4 touchdowns. And let's mention that the Raiders traded for Geno Smith, who is a massive improvement over Aiden O'Connell and Gardner Minshew, and Geno has proven to be able to support multiple receiving options in the same season. And the Raiders are now operating under a new offense under Chip Kelly, who has given us some big fantasy production from receivers in the NFL before. In 2013, Deshaun Jackson was the wide receiver 10 in fantasy football with over 1,300 yards and 9 touchdowns on 126 targets. In 2014, Jeremy Maclin, wide receiver 9 in fantasy football, also over 1,300 yards and 10 touchdowns on 144 targets. And in 2015, Jordan Matthews was the wide receiver 17 with 1,000 yards and 8 touchdowns on 126 targets. You want to know the quarterbacks for those years in Philadelphia? It was Nick Foles, Mark Sanchez, and Sam Bradford. Geno Smith might literally be the best quarterback that Chip Kelly has ever had in the NFL, and Jakobi Meyers is probably one of the better receivers he's had as well. I think him versus Jeremy Maclin is a very interesting debate, and Maclin put up 1,310 in this offense just a decade ago. Now, of course, Brock Bowers is probably the true Raiders quote-unquote wide receiver 1, but they've already shown that they can both be successful together even in a not-so-great offense. If Geno Smith and Chip Kelly elevate this team to a higher level, both Brock Bowers and Jakobi Meyers could be huge winners of a more condensed target share with a 4,000-yard passer. Jackson Smith-Njigba was the wide receiver 8 in fantasy football last year with 1,100 yards and 6 touchdowns, catching passes from Geno Smith as the more PPR kind of receiver in that offense. That is Jakobi Meyers. That's what he brings to the Raiders offense, and that's what he can be for fantasy football as a potential fantasy wide receiver 1 late in drafts. And finally, as I said in the beginning of this video, this player may just be the best candidate for an absolute ADP smashing, league winning breakout season in 2025. All of the signs are there for Packers wide receiver Jayden Reed. Anybody with eyeballs that have watched Jayden Reed play knows that this dude is far and away the best receiver in Green Bay. His only issue to this point has just been volume. For some reason, Jayden Reed has been unable to eclipse 100 targets in a season and has actually posted back-to-back seasons of just 75 touches, that is receptions and rush attempts. But on those 75 touches, he totaled over 900 yards and 10 touchdowns as a rookie in 2023, then over 1,000 yards and 7 touchdowns as a sophomore last year, a year that Jordan Love played a ton of games injured and Josh Jacobs scored seemingly no less than 43 times. So let's run through the reasons that I believe Jayden Reed is a massive breakout candidate this year. Number 1, we actually started to see the breakout already at the start of last season. From weeks 1 through 7, with a healthy Jordan Love for a few games and Malik Willis for another couple, Reed was on pace for nearly 1,400 total yards and 10 touchdowns on 95 touches. He was averaging 15.5 PPR points per game and was the wide receiver 6 over that stretch. He still wasn't getting a ton of volume. He only averaged about 5.5 targets per game, but that is substantially more volume than what he was getting from week 8 on when Jordan Love was fighting through a groin injury and Green Bay was winning with Josh Jacobs scoring twice every single week. Green Bay ended the season throwing 100 fewer times in 2024 than they did in 2023, which I believe was strictly because of Jordan Love's injuries. I think Green Bay wants to be the team that they were in 2023 and to start last year, not how they ended the season last season. And that can only be a good thing for Jayden Reed. The second reason, I did my own study on year 3 wide receivers, specifically looking at the 22 players since 2010 who posted a 15+% target share in each of their first 2 seasons, then played at least 15 games in year 3, and what that meant for that year 3 season. Of those 22 receivers, 19 of them posted at least a 22% target share in year 3, 16 of them posted at least a 23.5% target share. Fun fact, Jayden Reed has posted 15 or more % target share in both seasons so far and is entering year 3. An increase to a 22% target share could put Jayden Reed somewhere in the 120 target range this year if Green Bay gets back to throwing 550 plus times. A 23.5% target share puts him in the 130s for total targets. That is a massive jump in volume and opportunity for Jayden Reed, and a jump that would not be unwarranted based on his efficiency and talent with the ball in his hands as the true Packers wide receiver 1, nor would that target share jump be unprecedented in the last few years with other receivers like Jayden Reed. Example number 1, Tyreek Hill jumped from a 19% target share in year 2 to a 23% target share in year 3 and had a massive breakout season in Kansas City with 1,500 yards and 12 touchdowns. Prior to that year 3 breakout, Tyreek had been a more low volume but extremely efficient receiver and rusher who was obviously behind a prime Travis Kelce, but was also battling for targets with Jeremy Maclin and Albert Wilson and Demarcus Robinson, just all of these guys that weren't really that good, and it was just so obvious that Tyreek was so much better than them and just needed more work. He actually averaged 11.3 yards per target and 13.5 yards per touch in year 2. Jayden Reed averaged 11.4 yards per target and 13.6 yards per touch last year in his year 2. Second example, Deebo Samuel jumped to a 23% target share in year 3 after a good rookie year, then an injured playing only half the season year 2. But in year 3, with way more volume, Deebo had his best season of his career. It was really the Deebo Samuel year. 1,800 total yards, 14 total touchdowns. Again, prior to that year 3 breakout, Deebo was fighting for targets with George Kittle, a rookie Brandon Ayuk, Kendrick Bourne, Emmanuel Sanders, more guys that it was just obvious that Deebo was better than and just needed more work. As a rookie in his one full season of play before his year 3, Deebo also posted 10 yards per target, 13.5 yards per touch. Example number 3, Deebo's own teammate Brandon Ayuk had a big year 3 breakout with over 1,000 yards and 8 touchdowns before an even bigger year 4 breakout. But prior to Ayuk's year 3, he had never seen over 100 targets, never eclipsed over 900 receiving yards, but was extremely effective on a per touch basis. That once again, it was just obvious that he needed more work because he was just so talented. In year 2, Ayuk averaged 10 yards per target and 13.8 yards per touch. So I hope that Matt LaFleur can be the smart coach that I know that he is and just say, hey, Jayden Reed is by far our best player on offense. We should get him more snaps and more opportunities, and I bet good things are going to happen. It's a realization that Andy Reid and Kyle Shanahan also had with their players after a couple of seasons. Again, just like Tyreek Hill and Deebo Samuel and Brandon Ayuk, it is painfully obvious that Jayden Reed can be that caliber of player if given the opportunity. Worst case scenario, Reed is just the same player he's been the last 2 years. I mean, he's not going to get less opportunity this year. So if year 3 is just a repeat of years 1 and 2 as the wide receiver 25 and wide receiver 29 in fantasy football, I mean, that alone is worth drafting him as a wide receiver 40-something in the 9th round. But if Reed does get more volume and does solidify his role as the true wide receiver 1 for Jordan Love and a great Green Bay Packers offense, well, you're looking at one of, if not the best pick in all of fantasy football in 2025.